The night preceding the Battle of Salamis possessed an eerie stillness, as if the very sea was holding its breath in anticipation. Nestled within the constricted straits between Salamis Island and the Attic coast, where shadowy waters embraced the rugged shoreline, lay the Greek fleet at anchor. Their vessels, lithe and swift triremes, rested like battle-weary yet ever-vigilant warriors. The men aboard sought solace in fragmented sleep, snatching fleeting moments of uneasy rest or gazing up at the star-studded night sky, pondering the dawn's uncertain promise. Even the gentle rocking of the ships couldn't quell the palpable tension that had been mounting for weeks. Before we get into the main content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving a like, leaving a comment, and share and support me in bringing more great videos to you. Thank you so much. To the east, lurking beyond the veil of darkness, lay a force of such magnitude that eyewitnesses swore it blotted out the horizon. The formidable navy of Xerxes, the king of kings. Hundreds upon hundreds of Persian warships awaited in the open sea, arrayed in vast, sweeping formations, their decks teeming with soldiers, archers, and marines. Their sails, like colossal wings, drooped in the stillness of night. Their very presence cast a heavy pall over the minds of the Greek sailors, who knew that with the sunrise, these imposing vessels would begin their inexorable advance, like a relentless tide surging toward the narrow waters where the Greek fleet had gathered. Amidst this atmosphere of hushed anticipation, Themistocles stood upon the deck of his flagship, his gaze fixed across the shadowed strait toward a faint glow emanating from the Persian campfires. The flickering lights formed chains stretching along the distant shore, a myriad of flames, each marking a ship or tent. Yet, Themistocles betrayed no hint of fear. His face remained serene, as if he were observing the unfolding night exactly according to his carefully laid plans. For him, Salamis represented not merely a battle, but the culmination of a strategy he had meticulously crafted over years, often standing alone against the prevailing opinions of his own people. He had tirelessly argued, persuaded, implored, and even subtly manipulated the Athenians into building a powerful navy. And now, on this quiet night, he stood poised before the moment when his audacious gamble would be put to the ultimate test by the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever witnessed. The Greek fleet was a heterogeneous mosaic of city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Aegina, Megara, and others, each with its own unique dialect, customs, and deeply ingrained rivalries. Many of the sailors harbored distrust for one another. Some had even engaged in wars against each other only a generation prior. Even now, their alliance remained tenuous and fragile. Some clamored to sail away and defend their own individual cities. Others questioned Themistocles' unwavering insistence on fighting within the confines of the narrow straits. And still others were simply paralyzed by the sheer size and might of the Persian fleet. Yet they remained bound together by a shared necessity and the stark, undeniable truth that if they fled, their homeland would be irrevocably lost. On this fateful night, Themistocles convened a meeting with the Greek commanders. As expected, the discussion commenced with palpable tension. Eurybiades, the Spartan commander in overall charge, was a man defined by his cautious nature. He expressed concerns that engaging in battle within such a confined space might trap the Greek ships, leaving them vulnerable. Others, particularly those from the Peloponnese, advocated for a strategic retreat to the Isthmus, where land fortifications were being diligently prepared. They argued that the fleet should directly shield the Isthmus, rather than risking everything in a potentially devastating naval confrontation. However, Themistocles had anticipated these very concerns. He spoke with measured calmness but unwavering firmness, his eyes steady and resolute, his voice carrying the full weight of his conviction. He meticulously explained why the narrow straits represented their only viable hope. In open water, the Persian fleet, with its superior numbers and maneuverability when spread out, would inevitably envelop and crush them. But within the cramped confines of Salamis, sheer numbers would become meaningless. The Persian ships, being large and unwieldy, would find it difficult to turn quickly, leading to inevitable collisions. Their carefully planned formation would shatter and disintegrate. Their archers would lose their effectiveness, unable to find clear lines of sight. If the Greeks remained close, disciplined, and calm, they could strike with pinpoint precision, transforming the straits into a veritable labyrinth of destruction for the enemy. His words were devoid of fiery rhetoric or impassioned fury. Instead, they were quiet, carefully measured, and heavy with an undeniable certainty. The other commanders listened intently, some reluctantly, others with a dawning sense of understanding. As he spoke, a gentle breeze stirred across the deck, carrying with it the familiar scent of salt and the mysteries of night. A few commanders cast their gaze toward the straits, visualizing the scenario that Themistocles had so vividly described. A narrow channel where Greek discipline and strategic brilliance could triumph over Persian might. And slowly, imperceptibly, the resistance in the room began to soften. Still, lingering doubts persisted. Eurybiades questioned whether the Persians would even be willing to enter the straits. What if they chose to simply wait in open waters, patiently biding their time? Themistocles offered a slight smile, the kind of knowing smile that appears when a plan is already meticulously accounted for every possible contingency. "They will come," he said quietly, his voice filled with assurance, "because I have given them a reason to." He revealed that he had sent a secret message earlier that day, conveyed through a trusted slave, one of the most audacious gambles of the entire war. The message informed Xerxes that the Greek alliance was on the verge of collapse, that the fleet was planning a clandestine escape under the cover of darkness. It implored the Persians to block all the exits, trapping the Greeks before they could slip away. For any other commander, such a message would have been deemed an act of outright treachery. But for Themistocles, it represented the final, crucial piece of his carefully constructed strategy. He understood Xerxes' immense pride, his insatiable hunger for a decisive victory, his unwavering desire to crush Greece completely. The message would lure the Persian fleet exactly where he needed them to be. By the time the commanders fully grasped the depth and audacity of Themistocles' plan, the horizon was already beginning to shift. In the distance, beyond the island, faint shapes began to materialize and move. Persian ships were repositioning themselves, gliding silently through the night in wide, sweeping arcs. They were attempting to encircle the Greeks, sealing off all possible exits from the narrow straits. The trap was being set, but not by the Persians, as they believed, but by Themistocles himself, who had masterfully manipulated the situation to his advantage. As the commanders dispersed, each returning to their respective ships, the heavy weight of the impending moment settled over the entire fleet. The night grew even darker, and the only sounds that could be heard were the soft tapping of ropes against masts and the faint murmurs of sailors who sensed something significant in the air, an approaching storm of wood, bronze, and unwavering determination. Themistocles remained on deck long after the others had departed. He stared into the dark waters, watching the faint ripples move beneath the hull of his ship. He knew that the upcoming battle would define not only the fate of Athens, but the fate of all of Greece. He also knew that many of the men sleeping aboard their ships had already lost everything. Athens had been burned to ground by the Persians only days earlier. They had nothing left to protect now except their future. The night before Salamis was a moment suspended between abject terror and unwavering hope. The Greeks were significantly outnumbered, utterly exhausted, and consumed by uncertainty. Yet they were also united, if only for this brief but pivotal moment in history, by the shared belief that freedom was worth fighting for, even worth dying for. The sea remained calm and still. The stars shimmered faintly overhead, casting their gentle light upon the scene. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the Persian fleet continued its slow, inexorable advance, drawing ever closer. The stage was set. The Straits of Salamis awaited the dawn. The days that followed were a surreal mixture of heightened tension and quiet resolve. The island of Salamis, normally a tranquil haven with its rocky shores and the fragrant scent of pine carried on a breeze, had been transformed into the final refuge of the Greek alliance. Across the strait, the Persian fleet loomed like a dark storm poised to unleash its fury. Their masts rose in dense clusters, forming an intimidating forest of wood and rope that stretched as far as the eye could see. Yet within the Greek encampment, a different kind of force began to stir. Not one of overwhelming numbers, but one of unwavering determination. Every day, groups of sailors engaged in rigorous rowing drills on the water, the rhythmic splash of their oars echoing across the strait. Themistocles observed these exercises with quiet intensity, meticulously studying the patterns of tides, the distances between anchor points, and the distinctive behavior of Persian patrol ships. His eyes, sharp and discerning, missed nothing. If Salamis was to become the stage upon which Greece's very survival will be determined, then every gust of wind and every shift in the current mattered immensely. At dusk one evening, a thin fog drifted across the sea, blurring the distinct boundary between water and sky. The Greek commanders gathered along the shore, where a detailed map was unrolled upon a flat stone. Lamps flickered, casting a warm glow upon their faces. Eurybiades, the Spartan commander, stood with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Themistocles traced a finger along the narrow strait that separated Salamis from the mainland. "Here," he said softly, his voice resonating with conviction. "The Persians will be forced to fight in a constrained line, unable to stretch their superior numbers across open waters. They lose their inherent advantage. Their speed becomes severely limited, and their maneuvering becomes clumsy and ineffective." Some of the commanders nodded in agreement. Others hesitated, their faces etched with doubt. "But we are essentially cornered," one of them argued, his voice tinged with apprehension. "If they manage to trap us inside, there will be no room to retreat, no avenue for escape." Themistocles met his gaze directly, his eyes unwavering. "Exactly," he replied, his voice filled with steely resolve. "A cornered wolf bites hardest, and our ships, though fewer in number, are lighter, faster, and specifically designed for navigating these treacherous waters. In this strait, the sea itself becomes our invaluable ally." His words carried a quiet yet profound conviction, the kind of unwavering belief that slowly but surely melts away even the most deeply ingrained doubts. But even so, Eurybiades still appeared uncertain, his face a mask of apprehension. He invariably favored caution over risk, and the very notion of a decisive battle fought in this confined space unsettled him deeply. Still, the Greek sailors could sense a tangible shift in the atmosphere. Where fear had once weighed heavily upon their hearts, a cautious yet tenacious hope now began to take root. As night settled in, casting its long shadows across the land, Themistocles walked slowly along the beachfront, pausing occasionally to watch the flickering lantern lights inside the triremes. Men were diligently sharpening their spears, repairing damage or handles, or engaging in hushed conversations about their families, who were so far away and yet so present in their thoughts. Some murmured fervent prayers to the gods, seeking divine intervention and protection. Others simply sat in contemplative silence, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. Themistocles paused next to a ship where a young sailor sat alone, his gaze fixed upon the distant horizon. "First time in battle?" Themistocles asked, his voice gentle and reassuring. The boy startled slightly but nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll do whatever is needed, whatever it takes." Themistocles placed a comforting hand on the young sailor's shoulder. "Remember this," he said, his voice filled with wisdom and experience. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. When dawn comes, trust in your brothers beside you. Rely on their strength, and they will rely on yours." The boy breathed slowly, drawing strength and resolve from Themistocles' words. By dawn, a cool wind swept across the strait, carrying with it the faint sounds of the Persian camp. The distant blare of trumpets, foreign chants, and shouted commands echoed across the water, signaling the imminent approach of battle. The Persians were actively preparing for the confrontation. Their king, Xerxes, had ostentatiously set up a grand throne atop the hills on the mainland, intending to witness the utter destruction of the Greek fleet with his own eyes, reveling in his perceived victory. An air of unwavering confidence radiated from the Persian lines. After all, they firmly believed that their triumph was inevitable, an unavoidable outcome. But belief alone, Themistocles knew, does not ultimately decide the outcome of war. Themistocles understood that the Persians relied heavily on their sheer size and overwhelming force, but he also recognized that this very strength made them predictable, limiting their strategic options. He continued to meticulously refine his strategy, carefully observing the nuances of the tides and calculating the precise timing of his planned maneuvers. The strait was narrow enough that the Persian ships would inevitably become jammed together if too many attempted to enter at once, disrupting their carefully planned formations. Their carefully coordinated formations would break down, and confusion would spread rapidly through their ranks. And in those fleeting moments of chaos, the superior agility and tactical brilliance of the Greek fleet could strike decisively, turning the tide of battle in their favor. On the second night, a fresh idea ignited in Themistocles' mind, a new spark of inspiration that could potentially alter the course of the war. He summoned a trusted messenger, Xerxes, and spoke quietly with him on a secluded path, ensuring that their conversation remained private and confidential. Though no one else overheard their exchange, whispers soon spread throughout the camp that Themistocles was planning something bold, something undeniably risky, perhaps even bordering on the edge of danger. Before sunrise, Xerxes slipped away into the darkness, rowing silently toward the Persian lines, his small boat barely disturbing the surface of the water. His mission was clear and precise. Deliver a message intended to convince Xerxes that the Greek alliance was fracturing and on the verge of collapse, that some wished to flee under the cover of darkness, while others remained hesitant and indecisive. If the Persians believed this fabricated intelligence, they would undoubtedly attempt to block every possible escape route, pushing their ships into the strait more quickly and aggressively than originally planned, exactly as Themistocles needed them to do. When Xerxes returned hours later, soaked to bone with sea mist and shivering from the cold, Themistocles greeted him calmly, but with eyes that gleamed with purpose, betraying the intensity of his inner resolve. Whatever response Xerxes had given to the deceptive message, it was undoubtedly enough to set Themistocles' plan in motion. The following morning provided irrefutable proof of the plan's effectiveness. The Persian fleet stirred earlier than usual, spreading out like a vast shadow across the water, their imposing presence casting a pall over the entire area. Their ships positioned themselves menacingly nearer to the entrances of the strait, effectively sealing off all possible escape routes for the Greek fleet. The Greeks watched in silence as the trap closed, seemingly around them. Only it was not a trap designed for them, but for their unsuspecting enemy. Within the Greek ranks, tension tightened like a drawn bowstring, each man bracing himself for the inevitable clash. Eurybiades confronted Themistocles once more, his voice barely above a whisper, his face etched with concern. "You forced their hand," he said sharply, his words tinged with a mixture of frustration and apprehension. "Now we have no choice but to fight here, in this confined space." "Yes," Themistocles replied softly, his voice filled with unwavering confidence. "And now they must fight on our terms, according to our carefully laid plan." The morning sun rose slowly, casting its warm glow across the water and transforming the sea into a shimmering expanse of molten bronze. Waves shimmered and danced in the light. The strait narrowed into a throat of bright, shifting light, a gateway to either victory or utter destruction. The Greek ships, resting at anchor, bobbed gently in the mild current, their presence a symbol of defiance. For many of the sailors, this day felt strangely suspended in stillness, as if time itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what fate would ultimately deliver. Training drills intensified, the sailors pushing themselves to their limits. The steady beat of the rowing master staffs echoed throughout the fleet, providing a constant rhythm and focus. Stroke, stroke, stroke. The oars cut through the water with precision and power, each stroke propelling the ships forward. It was not merely practice. It was a vital preparation for survival, a honing of skills that would be essential in the coming battle. On shore, older veterans guided the younger men, imparting their knowledge and experience. They adjusted their spear grips, ensuring a firm and steady hold, and taught them how to brace their bodies when inevitable impact came, preparing them for the brutal realities of naval warfare. They spoke quietly, without urgency but with deep clarity, as if they were handing down invaluable wisdom rather than simply issuing commands. When midday arrived, Themistocles gathered the Athenian rowers and marines, addressing them with a calm and steady voice. His tone was not fiery or impassioned, but was full of something far stronger than mere passion. It was filled with unshakable conviction, a deep-seated belief in their ability to prevail. "You stand on the very edge of history," he told them, his eyes scanning their faces, seeking to connect with each individual, not as helpless victims of fate, but as the authors of your own destiny. If we falter here, our homes will fall, our families will be scattered to winds, and our stories will fade into oblivion. But if we stand firm, if we fight with courage and determination, This narrow sea will become the turning point of our freedom, the place where we secured our future. The men listened intently, absorbing every word, their faces reflecting a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Their breaths steadied, their hearts aligned, united by a shared purpose. The Persian fleet, glittering with polished bronze and towering sails, grew increasingly restless across the water, their movements signaling their imminent intention to attack. They would attack soon, and the battle would commence. As twilight approached, casting its long shadows across the land, clouds gathered overhead, casting a muted glow over the strait. Fires burned brightly along the Greek shore, providing warmth, light, and a sense of quiet unity. Men huddled together, sharing simple meals, exchanging small memories of their childhoods, or whispering hopes and dreams for a future they desperately hoped to see. Themistocles stood alone near the water's edge, his silhouette outlined against the fading light. His shadow stretched long across the sand, a symbol of his unwavering commitment. In the fading light, he closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, seeking inner peace and clarity. He thought of Athens, his beloved city, of its bustling marketplaces filled with vibrant activity, of the joyful voices of children running through the agora, and of the solemn promise he had made to defend his city at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Tomorrow, the sea would erupt in a violent storm of wood, bronze, and blood. But tonight, there was only the stillness before the storm, a moment of quiet reflection before the chaos that was about to unfold. And in that profound stillness, the fate of Greece waited, suspended between hope and despair. The sun rose slowly over the waters of Salamis, pushing back the final shadows of night and revealing a sky washed in pale gold. This dawn felt different, charged with a sense of destiny. It did not simply mark the start of another ordinary day. It marked the precise moment when thousands of men on both sides of the straits would test their courage against the relentless forces of fate itself, determining the course of history. The thin mist that lingered over the sea curled and dissolved as the light strengthened, revealing the distinct outlines of ships scattered across the water. On the Greek side, triremes prepared to row forward in a disciplined formation, their oars poised and ready. On the Persian side, a massive armada, shimmering in the morning light, began to stretch itself into long, sweeping lines, ready to unleash its devastating power. The sea no longer waited patiently. It was awakening, stirring to life in anticipation of the battle that was about to commence. On Themistocles' flagship, the general stood quietly as the crews finished their final preparations. His face, stern but calm, betrayed nothing of the intense tension gripping the men around him. Sailors tightened leather straps on the oars, adjusted their helmets, checked the points of their spears, and whispered silent prayers to the gods, seeking their divine favor. Each man knew that once the drums began to beat and the oars dipped into the water, there would be no turning back, no possibility of retreat. The only path was forward, toward the inevitable clash of wood and bronze and the uncertain promise of survival. Themistocles surveyed the enemy lines through the gentle morning haze, his eyes sharp and calculating. The Persian fleet was astronomical in size, an overwhelming display of naval power. Even after enduring storms, suffering losses at Artemisium, and enduring the long and arduous march of the campaign, Xerxes still commanded hundreds upon hundreds of ships, Phoenician, Egyptian, Ionian, Cypriot, Lycian, each bringing its own unique tactics, its own distinctive way of fighting. It was a moving tapestry of the vast empire itself, a symbol of Persian dominance. At the forefront of the armada, the elite Phoenician squadrons pushed relentlessly closer, their hulls cutting through the water like the blades of giant knives, their intentions clear. Behind them, rows upon rows of Persian ships extended outward in a vast crescent formation, as if attempting to engulf the entire strait, leaving no room for escape. Yet to Themistocles, this enormous display of force was not a source of fear or intimidation. It was simply a confirmation that his carefully crafted plan had worked flawlessly. The Persians were crowding into the narrow waters of Salamis, exactly where their overwhelming numbers meant absolutely nothing, negating their primary advantage. Themistocles could almost feel the tightening of the trap, the imminent moment when his strategic brilliance would be revealed. The Greek ships began to form up, each contingent taking its designated position. The Athenians taking the center, the Spartans and Corinthians holding the flanks, and the Aeginetans positioned where their renowned seamanship could have the most significant impact. Slowly, gently, the triremes aligned themselves like pieces in a quiet but deadly arrangement, each ship playing a crucial role. The wooden hulls creaked softly, a symphony of anticipation. Their blades lifted and dipped in unison, creating a rhythmic pulse. The scent of wet ropes and tar filled the air, a familiar and comforting aroma. And still, all awaited the signal to advance, the command that would unleash the fury of battle. Then came the sound the men had been waiting for, the signal that would forever change their lives. A single trumpet call cut through the morning silence. A sharp, ringing note that seemed to ripple across the sea, electrifying the atmosphere. Every oarsman straightened his back, his muscles tensing in readiness. Every helmsman tightened his grip on the rudder, preparing to steer his ship through the chaos. Every warrior planted his feet firmly inside the hull, bracing himself for the inevitable impact. Themistocles gave the order, his voice clear and resolute. The drums beat once, twice, then rolled into a steady, thunderous rhythm, a call to arms that echoed across the water. The battle had officially begun. The Greek line rode forward as one unified body, the oars slicing through the water with a steady elegance, each stroke propelling them closer to the enemy. Meanwhile, the Persian fleet surged ahead in a chaotic rush, their commanders expecting to overwhelm the smaller Greek force quickly and decisively. But something strange and unexpected began to happen. The closer the Persian ships moved into the confined space of the strait, the more cramped their formation became, their movements increasingly restricted. Their long, fast-moving vessels could not maneuver freely in the narrow channel. The front line slowed, creating a bottleneck that disrupted the flow of the attack. The rear lines continued pushing forward, compounding congestion and adding to the growing confusion. Shouts of frustration and anger rang out across the decks as ships bumped and scraped against each other, their carefully laid plans unraveling before their very eyes. Confusion rippled through the ranks of the armada, spreading like wildfire. This was precisely what Themistocles had foreseen, the outcome he had meticulously planned for. The Greeks continued advancing with calm precision, their discipline unwavering. Their commanders kept the line tight, their helmsmen adjusting course by inches, navigating the treacherous waters with skill and expertise. And then, at precisely the perfect moment, when the distance was just right, the signal was given, a second trumpet call, signaling the Greek fleet to charge, to unleash their full fury upon the enemy. The sea erupted in a cacophony of violence. Greek triremes suddenly accelerated, their oars churning the water with explosive force, propelling them forward with incredible speed. Their bronze rams, sharp, reinforced, and glinting menacingly beneath the surface, cut forward like striking serpents, seeking their prey. The Persian front lines tried desperately to widen their formation to create more space, but there was simply no room to maneuver. The narrow strait trapped them like animals caught in a tightening cage, their superior numbers now a liability rather than an asset. The first collision hit with a thunderous crack, sending shock waves through the water. A Greek ship rammed into the side of a Phoenician vessel, with splintering in a shower of salt and jagged shards. Persian sailors cried out in pain and terror as the hull tore open, and water surged uncontrollably inside, threatening to capsize the ship. The Greek marines leapt aboard, shields raised high, spears thrusting with practiced precision, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Moments later, the enemy ship began to list precariously, its fate sealed, and soon it began to sink, swallowed by the sea that had carried it so proudly only minutes before. Then came the second crash, and the third, and countless more. Everywhere, ships met with brutal force, the chaos escalating with each passing moment. The sound of splintering timbers blended with the desperate war cries of men and the rhythmic pounding of oars, creating a deafening symphony of destruction. The water churned with foam, blood, and floating debris, a testament to the ferocity of the battle. Themistocles' voice rose above the chaos, urging his men to push forward with unwavering determination, to maintain their tight formation, to strike clean blows and pull away quickly, maximizing their effectiveness. The Persian fleet fought back fiercely, their soldiers displaying courage and resilience despite the overwhelming odds. Archers unleashed volleys of arrows that whistled down upon the Greek decks, seeking to inflict casualties. Marines boarded Greek ships, clashing with the heavily armed Greek hoplites in tight, brutal combat, the outcome uncertain. The smell of sweat, salt, and burning pitch filled the air, creating a suffocating atmosphere. The roar of thousands of men blended with the groaning of strained hulls, creating a deafening cacophony that reverberated across the water. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of the battle. The Persians were trapped in a labyrinth of their own making, a strategic blunder that would cost them dearly. Every backward movement resulted in further collisions, exacerbating the chaos. Every attempt to flee only created new tangles of ships, further restricting their movements. Their numbers, once their greatest strength, had now become their greatest burden, hindering their ability to maneuver effectively. One Athenian trireme, painted in a striking dark blue, sped forward with perfect timing and struck an Egyptian ship squarely at the waterline, delivering a devastating blow. The impact was so powerful that the Persian vessel buckled, cracked, and began to fold inward, its structural integrity compromised beyond repair. Greek sailors shouted triumphantly as they drew back and prepared to strike again, their morale soaring. From his high vantage point on a cliff overlooking the sea, Xerxes himself watched the unfolding battle with growing disbelief and dismay. What he had confidently expected to be a swift and glorious victory was rapidly turning into a scene of utter confusion and disarray. His admirals shouted conflicting orders, their voices filled with panic and desperation. His front lines were tangled and disorganized, unable to execute their planned maneuvers. He could see Greek ships breaking to the Persian formations, scattering his forces and wreaking havoc on his once imposing fleet. It was as if the sea itself had betrayed him, turning against him in his moment of triumph. Themistocles, meanwhile, observed the ebb and flow of the battle with the keen eye of a master strategist, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. He felt each collision as a confirmation of his plan, each Persian retreat as a validation of his strategic brilliance. He adjusted signals, repositioned squadrons, and reinforced spots where the Persians seemed momentarily strong, anticipating their every move. His mind moved faster than the chaos, seeing the pattern beneath the surface like a master chess player recognizing the turning point several moves ahead. The Greeks were no longer just resisting the Persian onslaught. They were actively winning the battle, gaining ground with each passing moment. But victory was not yet assured, and the outcome remained uncertain. The battle still raged violently, and many Greek ships had sustained severe damage, their hulls battered and their crews exhausted. The men were soaked in sweat and seawater, their bodies pushed to the absolute limit. The drums beat on relentlessly, driving them forward. The oars pulled, propelled by sheer willpower and determination. The strait narrowed around them like a battlefield carved from water and human spirit. And above it all, the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the storm of war unfolding below, bronze flashing, sails torn, and men fighting with unwavering courage for their homeland, for their families, and for the fragile promise of freedom. Salamis was beginning to reveal its true shape, its destiny unfolding before their very eyes. And fate was beginning to tilt, favoring the brave defenders of Greece. The battle roared on, and by mid-morning the Straits of Salamis had been transformed into a gruesome maze of shattered hulls, drifting bodies, broken oars, and swirling currents. The calm blue water that had greeted the dawn was now stained with the grim remnants of war. Splintered cedar, bronze fittings, scraps of torn sails, and dark patches where ships had capsized, claiming the lives of countless sailors. Overhead, gulls circled anxiously, drawn by the chaos and carnage below, their cries adding to the din of battle. The sounds of the battle, metal striking wood, men shouting in agony and triumph, drums pounding a relentless rhythm, echoed across the cliffs, as if the entire landscape were trembling with the force of it. Themistocles could feel the turning of the tide, a palpable shift in momentum. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, like a shift in the wind. It was gradual, steady, and unmistakable. Like watching a giant slowly lose its footing, its inevitable downfall imminent. The Persian formations had dissolved into scattered knots of resistance, their carefully orchestrated attack in ruins. Their numerical advantage had become utterly irrelevant in the confined space. Their famed speed was useless in the tight quarters of the strait. Their archers, usually devastating from long range, found few clear lines of fire in the crowded waters, their arrows often striking their own ships. Meanwhile, The Greek triremes, smaller and quicker to turn, moved like coordinated knives carving into the heart of the armada, their precision and agility overwhelming the enemy. As the Athenians pressed forward relentlessly, the Aeginetans struck decisively from the flanks, intercepting any Persian ship attempting to escape the strait and preventing them from regrouping. Corinthian vessels, previously positioned near the rear to provide support, now surged forward to pressure the enemy lines collapsing toward open water, ensuring their complete destruction. One particular moment stood out amidst the chaos, a single clash that seemed to encapsulate the entire spirit of the battle, a microcosm of the larger conflict. A massive Phoenician flagship, ornately decorated and heavily manned, attempted to break through the thinning Greek center, seeking to turn the tide of battle. It moved with impressive force, plowing through debris and scattering smaller craft in its wake, its determination unwavering. The ship's bronze-tipped ram gleamed menacingly under the sun as it prepared to strike a decisive blow. But an Athenian trireme, battered and missing several oars but manned by a crew with indomitable spirit, darted forward in a bold and daring maneuver, defying the odds. Its helmsman steered into the narrowest opening, sliding skillfully just under Phoenician's bow, avoiding a potentially devastating collision. With perfect timing, the Greek commander shouted the order, and the rowers, pushing through exhaustion and pain, slammed their oars into the water, giving it their all. The trireme leapt ahead with a burst of speed and drove its ram deep into the Phoenician hull, striking a critical blow. The impact was explosive, which shattered. Men were thrown from their positions in the chaos, and water burst inside the ship, threatening to capsize it. Before the Phoenicians could recover from the initial shock, two more Greek triremes closed in, one striking the stern while the other raked the deck with marines, cutting down the remaining defenders. Within minutes, the mighty vessel began to sink, tilting heavily before capsizing with deafening roar. Its reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. Cheers erupted from the surrounding Greek ships, not triumphal shout of arrogance, but raw cries of survival, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate will to live. Here's a revised and expanded translation, keeping the essence of the original while enhancing readability and flow. Disbelief washed over Xerxes. High above on the cliffs, he could only bear witness to the unfolding catastrophe below. His golden throne, brought at great expense from Persia for this moment of anticipated triumph, now felt like a gilded cage. From this lofty perch, all he could do was watch his ambitions crumble. His face, typically a mask of serene detachment, now betrayed fleeting expressions of frustration. He barked orders at his officers, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of battle. Unable to reach the embattled fleet, he was a powerless spectator as his navy, a force amassed in the far reaches of his vast empire, was systematically torn apart. Beside him, his scribes meticulously recorded the battle, though their hands trembled with each stroke of the stylus. They had come prepared to document an unparalleled victory, a moment that would resonate through the ages. Instead, they found themselves chronicling a devastating defeat. Yet, even as the Persian forces faltered, the Greeks were far from secure. Many of their ships were heavily damaged, their hulls splintered and leaking. Oars were snapped and useless. The crews were on the verge of collapse, their muscles screaming in protest. Dozens of Greek vessels had been destroyed outright or left crippled, dead in the water. The narrow strait was now a chaotic graveyard of shattered hulls, making any attempt at maneuvering an exercise in futility. Every advance required a Herculean effort, drawing on reserves of strength the exhausted men weren't sure they possessed. Still, they rowed with grim determination. Still, they fought with unwavering resolve. Still, they clung to the belief that each thrust of the oar, each adjustment of the rudder, each clash of spear against shield brought them one breath closer to securing their homeland. Amid the swirling chaos of the battle, Themistocles steered his flagship directly into the heart of the fighting. His very presence served as a rallying point, bolstering the flagging morale of the sailors around him. He pointed towards a cluster of Persian ships, attempting a desperate breakout. If they managed to escape, they could regroup in the open waters and prolong the battle for hours, perhaps even turn the tide. Themistocles was determined to prevent such a disaster. He signaled a squadron of Athenian triremes to tighten their formation. Their battered hulls, scarred and dented from countless collisions, aligned once more. Oars dipped into the water in perfect unison. The squadron surged forward. A spear thrust from the very depths of the sea. The Persians, seeing the assault, frantically tried to scatter. But the narrow confines of the strait offered no escape. In a final, brutal clash, the Greeks rammed and disabled each Persian vessel one by one. Some enemy ships erupted in flames as flaming arrows ignited the tar-lined decks. Others capsized, overwhelmed by Greek marines boarding from both sides in a ferocious melee. A few managed to slip past the Athenian squadron, only to be intercepted by Aeginetan ships lying in wait further west, ready to pounce on any stragglers. At last, the battle's momentum irrevocably shifted. There was no dramatic moment of silence, no sudden surrender. It was a gradual collapse, a painful unraveling of the once mighty Persian fleet, as ship after ship succumbed to the relentless Greek assault. The sounds of battle slowly transformed. The thunderous roar of collisions faded into quieter sounds of distant splashes and the groans of sinking vessels. The rhythmic beat of oars gave way to the shallow, exhausted breaths of the survivors. Greek commanders barked orders, now focused on gathering survivors, rescuing allies from sinking ships, and seizing any Persian vessel that remained afloat. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Themistocles allowed himself a deep, steadying breath. His chest rose and fell with the weight of a man who had carried not only the immediate burden of battle, but also the immense weight of an entire nation's future. He knew that victory was within reach, but he was also keenly aware that battles are not won solely on the sea. They are won in the hearts of the people who fight them. And now, the hearts of his sailors, though exhausted, bruised, and aching, were burning brighter than they had all morning. Across the water, the remaining Persian ships, those few still capable of flight, limped back towards the mainland. Some were engulfed in flames, others were half submerged, and still others were dragging their damaged hulls through the water, leaving a trail of debris in their wake. The Persian commanders desperately tried to organize a final stand, but the men were demoralized and broken. Many abandoned their ships, jumping into sea in a desperate attempt to cling to any piece of wreckage that might keep them afloat. Themistocles scanned the horizon, his gaze sweeping across the carnage. The waves reflected fragments of shattered ships like a broken mirror, each piece a testament to the brutality of the conflict. The cries of wounded men drifted across the water, a haunting reminder of the human cost of victory. His eyes took in everything: the pain, the destruction, the bravery, the loss. Victory, he knew, always demanded a price, a debt paid in blood and tears. But in this moment, he also felt a quiet certainty. Greece had weathered the worst of the storm. The sun now rested high in the sky, bright and unyielding, illuminating the stage of war as if revealing a profound truth, that courage, strategy, and unity, however fragile they may be, could stand firm against even the mightiest of empires. The battle was nearly over, its most violent moments consigned to memory. But the story of Salamis still had one more breath to take. One last surge of meaning that will reverberate far beyond the waters of this narrow strait, shaping the course of history for generations to come. The first light of dawn crept across the straits, tentatively touching the surface of the water with a faint, ethereal shimmer. It was a new morning, fragile and quiet, as if the sea itself were still reeling from the screams, the splintering wood, and the roaring commands that had shaken it to its core only hours before. Salamis was now in the past, yet it lingered in the air, an invisible presence that permeated everything. Every warrior, every oarsman, every commander carried a memory of the battle, as if it were permanently etched into their very bones. The remains of the battle, grim reminders of the day's violence, drifted aimlessly across the waves. Broken planks, a lone, solitary oar, a Persian shield bobbing helplessly on the surface. The acrid scent of smoke still hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of salt and the pervasive odor of sweat. But amid the haunting evidence of destruction, there was something else, something infinitely gentler, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a breeze that finally felt free, no longer burdened by the weight of war, a silence that felt earned, a respite purchased with courage and sacrifice, a profound sense that history itself had paused, just for a fleeting moment, to catch its breath and reflect on the magnitude of what had transpired. The Greek commanders gathered on a low rise overlooking the straits, their silhouettes etched against the lightening sky. The flickering fires in their small morning camp danced across their tired faces, casting long, dancing shadows. None of them had slept for long. Many had not slept at all, their bodies running on adrenaline and sheer will. But their exhaustion was tempered by a strange, almost palpable energy, the primal thrill of survival, the quiet awe of having participated in an event so immense that their minds were still struggling to comprehend its full significance. Themistocles stood slightly apart from the others, his gaze fixed on the water with an expression that was neither triumphant nor mournful. He seemed lost in deep contemplation, as though replaying every moment of the battle again and again in his mind, not out of regret or self-recrimination, but out of profound desire to understand its full meaning, to extract every possible lesson from the crucible of combat. He knew he had gambled everything, his hard-earned reputation, the precarious safety of Athens, the fragile trust of the Greek coalition, and for one rare, fleeting moment in time, everything had aligned perfectly. Strategy, weather, timing, and above all, the fierce, unyielding resolve of free men who refused to kneel before tyranny. Eurybiades approached him quietly, his footsteps barely disturbing the stillness of the morning. "You haven't spoken since dawn," he said, his voice soft so as not to shatter the delicate silence that had settled over the straits. Themistocles managed a faint smile, a subtle acknowledgment of his comrade's presence. "I've spoken too much these past weeks," he replied, his voice raspy with fatigue. "Let the sea speak now. It has much to say." "The sea speaks of victory," Eurybiades countered, his voice filled with a quiet sense of pride. Themistocles shook his head slowly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "No, the sea speaks of consequence. It speaks of the enduring ripples of this day's events, the challenges that lie ahead. Behind them, groups of sailors laughed with disbelief, slapped each other on the shoulders in joyous camaraderie, or simply sat staring blankly into distance, overwhelmed by the sheer, improbable fact that they were still alive to witness the dawn. The mood was not one of loud, boisterous celebration, but rather one of slow, quiet realization. A victory of such profound magnitude needed time to seep into the soul, to be fully absorbed and understood. Soon, heralds from the various city-states approached the commanders with fresh reports, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and awe. The Persian fleet, or what remained of it, was in full retreat, fleeing in disarray towards the Hellespont, desperate to escape the scene of their devastating defeat. Hundreds of ships had been destroyed, their hulls splintered and sinking to the bottom of the sea. Hundreds more were scattered and leaderless, their crews demoralized and adrift. Xerxes himself, the self-proclaimed king of kings, had already withdrawn across the bridge of boats, fearful that the victorious Greeks might pursue him north and carry the war into the very heart of his empire. The news spread among the weary men like a warm tide, washing over them with a sense of profound relief and accomplishment. They had done it. Against overwhelming odds, against the looming shadow of empire, they had carved out a space where courage mattered more than sheer numbers, where knowledge of the sea was more valuable than golden armor, where unity, fragile, chaotic, hard-won unity, had triumphed over fear and oppression. Yet, even in the midst of victory, there was no sense of arrogance or boastfulness. The Greeks understood all too well that their triumph had come at a terrible cost. Many had fallen in the battle, fathers, sons, friends, comrades in arms. Their bodies lay beneath the waves, becoming part of the sea that had carried them into battle, their sacrifice forever etched into the memory of those who had survived. Every cheer was tempered by remembrance, every moment of joy tinged with sadness. Themistocles walked slowly and deliberately toward the shoreline, his movements betraying his deep fatigue. There, alone with his thoughts, he knelt and dipped his hand into the cold, salty water. It was not a gesture of thanks to the gods, nor was it a gesture of mourning for the fallen. It was simply a connection, a tangible link to the element that had shaped his strategic vision, to the path that had led them to this pivotal moment, and to the eternal truth that the sea held both life and loss, both promise and peril. Behind him, Aristides, his longtime political rival, approached with a hesitant step. The two men exchanged a long, quiet look, their eyes conveying a depth of understanding that transcended words. They had disagreed for years, each mistrustful of the other's political influence in Athens, their relationship marked by animosity and suspicion. Yet in this singular moment, none of that mattered. Salamis had dissolved their petty differences, forging an unbreakable bond between them in a shared legacy of sacrifice and triumph. You achieve what many thought was utterly impossible, Aristides conceded, his voice devoid of any trace of resentment or envy. We achieved it, Themistocles corrected gently, his eyes meeting those of Aristides with a newfound sense of respect and camaraderie. And only because everyone played his part, from the lowliest oarsman to the most seasoned commander. Aristides turned his gaze toward the horizon, watching as the first rays of the rising sun painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson. Xerxes will not forget this day, he said, his voice filled with a sense of foreboding. No, Themistocles replied, his voice firm and resolute. But neither will Greece. The memory of Salamis will serve as a beacon of hope for generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of freedom. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the straits in its warm embrace, the Greek fleet prepared to sail to the isthmus, where the land armies eagerly awaited news of the naval victory. The oarsmen, their bodies aching and their hands blistered, took their places once more, their faces set with grim determination. Many still bore the marks of battle, bandages wrapped around wounds, bruises marring their skin, and exhaustion etched into their features. Yet every man rode with purpose, his movements infused with a newfound sense of pride and resolve. They were no longer merely sailors. They were witnesses to a turning tide in the age of empires, the architects of a new era. As their ships cut through the water, leaving white wakes in their path, the commanders allowed their thoughts to drift into deeper reflection, contemplating the significance of the events that had just transpired. What had happened at Salamis was far more than just a battle. It was a crucible in which the very soul of Greece had been tested. It was a moment when a fragile idea of freedom, unformed, unpolished, imperfect, had been pitted against overwhelming might and had ultimately prevailed, proving its enduring strength. It was a powerful reminder that small states, when united by a common purpose and a shared commitment to liberty, could challenge the great powers of the world and reshape the course of history. In the years to come, people would speak of the Battle of Salamis with awe and reverence, their voices filled with wonder. Some would attribute the victory to divine intervention, claiming that the gods had favored the Greeks and intervened on their behalf. Others would praise the cunning and strategic brilliance of Themistocles, hailing him as a visionary leader who had outwitted the Persians at every turn. Still others would point to the sheer determination and unwavering courage of the ordinary men who had refused to surrender their homes and their freedom, fighting with ferocity that stunned their enemies. And all would be correct in their own way, for Salamis was not the result of a single cause, but a complex constellation of human choices. Fear, hope, pride, discipline, desperation, all converging in one narrow strait to create a moment of profound historical significance. But in this quiet morning after the storm, none of the men were thinking of personal glory or lasting legacy. They were thinking of Athens, of returning home to rebuild the homes that had been burned, the temples that had been desecrated, and the lives that had been shattered by the Persian invasion. They were thinking of the faces of their loved ones waiting for them, of the stories they would share around the hearth, and the silence they would keep the fallen, honoring their memory with their deeds. Themistocles remained on deck as the coastline of Salamis slowly receded behind them, its jagged cliffs fading into the distance. His cloak fluttered lightly in the gentle breeze, and the salt spray kissed his weathered face. He did not smile, but there was a calmness in his eyes, a profound sense of peace that came from knowing he had done what he believed was right, despite every doubt, every accusation, and every sleepless night. He looked once more at the straits, now serene and almost impossibly gentle, their waters reflecting the clear blue sky above. "Let them forget my name," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the creaking of the ship and the rhythmic splash of the oars. But let them never forget what free men achieved here, in this narrow passage between fear and hope. The words were carried away by the wind, perhaps lost forever, perhaps preserved by the sea as it carried Greece into a new chapter of its history. For although the Persians would undoubtedly return to fight again, seeking to avenge their defeat and reassert their dominance, everything had irrevocably changed. The tide of history had turned, and the spirit of Greece, resilient, defiant, and luminous, had shown the world that even in the darkest hour, courage could light the way forward, and freedom could triumph over tyranny. And so the fleet sailed on into the sunlight, into uncertainty, into the long, unfolding story of a civilization that had chosen freedom over fear, forging its destiny on the anvil of courage and sacrifice. Salamis remained behind them, but also remained within them, whispering across every future generation that sometimes, just sometimes, a narrow strait could hold the fate of the world, and that the choices made in those moments of crisis could echo through eternity.